Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. I really appreciate everyone making time here. If you're joining us live on the webinar, thank you for making the time live. If you're listening to the podcast, we appreciate you being on the playlist. I'm James Sinclair. I'm the principal of Enterprise Alumni. We are the market-leading alumni engagement platform, and we help companies maintain a relationship with their former employees. I think most of the guests today and most listeners know that is the purpose of this conversation about maintaining a relationship with those that have worked with you in the past. We're going to jump straight into it. I think I just had kind of one view that I wanted to open up around the purpose of today's conversation, and that's 2020 has changed the entire dynamic of alumni relations. For many organizations, it's taken out the basement as a weird silo and put it on center stage, a seat in the boardroom. Recognizing this army of advocates is just incredible. You saw companies like Uber, who in addition to launching an alumni platform, actively talked about the fact that they need to help their people they're laying off reskill, replace, leveraging the resources. You saw companies like Carter, where the CEO wrote a message talking about the fact it's a relationship for life. So this conversation around the fact that you're leaving is no longer a weird secret you keep when you join a new organization. It's inevitable. You're going to leave, so let's just talk about it. You know, however, at the same time, many companies still think of alumni as very transactional in nature. What is the ROI? What's the speed of the ROI? What's the speed of moving from a cost center to a profit center? And for many organizations, it's kind of a nice to have cost center versus a must have. And I think whilst building a business case is critical, and actually being transactional, I think is totally okay. I think people just forget the other side of this, which is transactional is two-way. And I think, Carrie, you had something in your book. I remembered that if you're not a two-way, it's okay to be transactional, but if it's not two-way, you're just a manipulative jerk. And
I think that's a direct quote.
And I think that's a direct quote. But by the way, that's why, and we're going to get into it. That's why I loved your book, and we'll talk about that. You know, and I think people have to recognize that if you build a business for this, you know, an alumni community for the sole purpose of one transactional value, and you fight for that, you're done before you've started. You've got a mailing list, and you may well have a lot of people on that mailing list, but you've just got a mailing list of people. It's a dictatorship, and it's important to recognize what a dictatorship in a community looks like, because those two words don't really go together. So with that, I want to talk about that balance of power, how for many people on this call, they're vying for budget and buy-in, and they're trying to get executives to say, yes, everyone sees the value. No one ever says, oh, alumni, that's a terrible idea, but they often say, not right now. What's it going to take? We don't have the resources. We're in a pandemic. Surely now's the worst time to engage people. So I've got two amazing guests who I'm going to let introduce themselves and give a quick highlight reel of kind of who they are. Carrie, no secret, I stalked and chased you until you agreed to be on, and I'm delighted to have you. I read your book, so you don't have to feel like you have to self-promote. A phenomenal book, Building Brand Communities, which I loved, and I feel like I quote back to you and in the first 30 seconds of this webinar. I'd love you to give a quick introduction, who you are, you know, why this conversation perhaps is a good one.
Yes, an essential one. I am Carrie Melissa Jones. I'm so excited to be here today with Lisa and James, powerhouse group right here. So as James said, I am the co-author of Building Brand Communities. I still have my book with me, and mine has Post-its all over it and highlights and all of that. With my co-author, Charles Vogel, who's the author of The Art of Community. And I am a community consultant. I have been building communities online for 15 plus years. I'm also a researcher and master's student, and I study this from a social science perspective as well. What does it really mean that we're all now connected on the internet? Not all of us. Many, many, many human beings in the world, and that there'll be another billion people joining the internet soon. So I look at this from a really high level view and just project out what the future is going to be. So I'm not an enterprise alumni expert, but I am a communities expert, and all community architecture is essentially the same. So I'm excited to share some of those big principles with you today.
And I think you talked about that, Carrie, in the book, and all the other authors who've written some amazing books, like your co-author, Charles. You know, the pillars are very similar. It doesn't matter what your community is, whether it's Harley Davidson advocates, people that have left the company, or whatever it might be. It's all based on kind of, and we'll talk about that, trust and empathy and being human and two-way and serving and delivering value. And almost the funny thing about an alumni community, these are people who've walked out the door and have left voluntarily, and as they're walking out the door, you're like fishing them and being like, oh, before you leave, want to stay in touch? And they're like, well, if I wanted to stay in touch, I probably probably would have not left maybe. And so it's almost the worst time to enroll these people is as they're walking out the door. But the only thing they have in common is the fact they work at that company. And almost the minute they join, you take that off the table. Now you're just a community. The only, the entrance criteria was that. So over to my second guest, and whether Lisa likes it or not, I became a student of her within minutes of meeting. Lisa, there's so many incredible insights that you've delivered to customers and people, talking about the employee experience and talking about alumni specifically for the areas that I've learned from you. But I think one of the greatest things you've had is being able to build out these programs in bite-sized chunks, as in you hear these companies who want to have these monster transformations. I've heard the word employee transformation for 10 years from one of my customers. And it's like, are you there yet? Or is it ongoing? And they're like, well, it's a 15-year plan. But I think at the same time, it's really important to be able to break and make it achievable. And that's something you've been able to do for many customers of yours that I know. So maybe if I can lob it over to you, a quick who you are, what you're up to, and maybe a little bit about your background.
Yeah, thanks, James. And again, it's great to be here with Carrie as well as James. And following Carrie's introduction, I'm a little, a little shy for the first time in my life. But kudos to Carrie. My book's in process; it's not done yet, so it's a humbling experience itself. As James mentioned, my focus is really on experience, the art of experience, if you will, and the human nature of experience. And obviously, as many know, experience is sort of a new battleground for a lot of organizations. And I think organizations have, in many respects, as is typically the case, they're valuing the customer experience. But we all know that you can actually deliver a great customer experience if the employees who are on that front line interacting with your customers are not enjoying themselves as well. So my focus is really on bringing the practice of experience design, service design into organizations, using the organization as the actual design material, and helping organizations understand, like Carrie has done in community and like James does all the time, that engagement is a little bit different than is typically understood in organizations. I think in a lot of organizations think of this as a top-down, way of engaging people. It's almost like a management mantra, where actually engagement is really about heart and soul and bottoms up. Like when I feel it, I'll be connected to, and until then, it just doesn't happen. It's like love, So anyhow, that's the world that I live in. It's as many of you know out there, if you know me, that's all I bang around about. And I will keep banging the drum until somebody starts listening loud and clear, and we actually make a change in a lot of organizations about people. They spend several hours of their entire life working, and many of them are miserable. And I have promised myself to at least try to make an impact on that. So here I am. I'm really excited to get into the details of the webinar today.
I need intros like both of yours. I'm going to rework mine in totality for the next one. The reality is both of you have deep experience in what it means to be human, to create community, to create experience. And I think that's where I almost want to kick off, is kind of a little bit in the weeds. That is, everything around this conversation of alumni relations makes sense. These people we've invested millions of dollars recruiting, millions of dollars retaining, health benefits, high fives, cupcakes on their birthday, and they leave and walk out the door, and they get some colleagues who say stay in touch, maybe a few people. They maybe get an edible arrangements gift basket, and that's really the end of the conversation until someone needs something. At a recent customer, the CFO was the one that approved the budget that said every leaver should get a box from us to say thank you for your service. And I was like, the CFO, the person that negotiated with us and drove our price down? And he was like, absolutely, I've invested millions of dollars in these people. Are you kidding me? What, I'm not going to invest $45 when they leave to say stay in touch? Like, there is just no financial practice where that would be okay. So we've all of a sudden found these advocates for these programs in the most extraordinary places that seem so obvious when you think about it, but it just makes sense. These are people that left your company, leaving is inevitable. So I guess my first question, rolling over to kind of you, Carrie, is such an unfair question. Why are kind of the people in the organization who are standing up and being like, I think we should do an alumni program. We don't have anything. We don't have any, forget alumni program. We should do a community. We don't have anything. We have no resources. We have no people. We have no budget. I'm in HR. I'm in comms. We're like, I've got to build an army of people to kind of support me. And I'm sure you've been in that a million times as a consultant of like, we have this idea. How does it go from an idea to a kind of executive supported initiative that isn't just in the basement?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And I will say sometimes it doesn't ever go from idea into executive support. It stays in the basement for many, many years. So you can still be successful in the basement. It's just that you're in the basement and it's going to be a really high, lots of steps to climb. But yeah, I mean, my clients, especially right now, a lot of people are coming to me and saying, we've been putting this off for years and now we realize this is really, really important and necessary. And I'm not saying to them like, oh, too bad, I told you so. We should have done this 5 years ago. Instead, I think it's really important to start having conversations internally about what your priorities are, what your business values are, what you believe, and how your executive office thinks about making decisions. And then also to, from the other side, build more empathy among your employees for, in my case, it's usually external community members. So your customers, sometimes it's volunteers. What are their lives like? What challenges are they facing? And then what is the way that we can overlap both the business needs, how we make decisions here, with what our members really need, and what we're hearing from them. And I can imagine from an alumni standpoint too, that leaving a job is such an emotional time that getting to connect with people during that time and making it easier for them during that time could seriously shift everything. And I often say in my work, start with one person. If you can have an effect on one person, you can have ripple effects down the line. And sometimes those ripple effects are not possible to measure. They're just not. Sort of like if you were trying to measure how much your mother loved you, what are you going to do? Look at we mentioned this in the book, the number of times she calls you per week. No, that's not really going to tell you much. But every person you reach who's leaving that role is going to have a story that they tell people. And statistics show that people who have negative experiences share them more widely than positive ones. So I think this is an incredible opportunity. So I don't know if I answered your question, but
no, you did. And I think it leads perfectly into the question that I have kind of for Lisa, which is you're exactly right. Look, when you leave a company, you're going to get to your new job and everyone is going to be like, oh, where did you come from? Nice to have you here. And you're going to say, I worked at this company, I escaped, or it was amazing. I think we can do some stuff. I've got to introduce you guys, can I invite them in? And for some reason, companies forget that as you walk out the door, you are becoming a brand advocate. And so some people say, oh, well, but this lives in HR. How does that drive recruiting? And it goes back to the conversation we almost had a few minutes before everything started, which is people are more conscious buyers of who they're doing business with, why they're doing business. And so that kind of leads me a little bit into you, Lisa. Given leaving is inevitable, for us, we talk about leaving. We're a tiny company. When someone joins us in the interview, I always ask, when you leave, what job are you going to have? What job are you going to be applying for? Because I want to know what I'm competing with and what I have 3 years to try and get you to, because I want to talk about it often. I want to make sure that they can talk about it. But why is the leaving experience not treated with the same respect, perhaps budget, time as the joining experience? When I would tell you the leaving is almost as, if not more or equal, in criticality. There's a question in there somewhere, Lisa, sorry.
Yeah. And I guess it's interesting. One of the things I was thinking about is, what if we thought about the organization as a human and the human as a human? So I think a little bit of the stigma that comes with this is that organizations are shamed, if you will, when somebody leaves. It's like, oh, we weren't good enough for you, or or you made a different decision, or the cases. And so it's almost at that time when you're dating and you decide to break up, both of you kind of have this feeling about it, right? And so, I think Carrie's point about opening up the conversation a lot sooner is where you actually, I think, have a more impactful way of when the leaving happens. It's not the sense of, I don't like you anymore, or we're broken up, don't reach out to me and don't talk to me, but it's the actual mature relationship as opposed to anything else, where, when people join the company, you talk about how people who leave the company are still part of the extended, if you will, brand ambassadors. And so there isn't this sense of, I left and it's a shameful thing for the organization, and now I'm going to talk about it loud and clear. I think those who think about people as brand advocates I think from the very beginning until the relationship goes on and on forever are the people who are going to win, because then it's beyond like this tit for tat and it becomes much more of a meaningful connection. So that's how I would describe that one, James. Almost get out of the mentality of like the life cycle of an employee at an organization and think about the I would say, you know, sort of like the dramatic storyline of a relationship, right?
I mean, I love that both of you have brought up dating, because I believe it's so similar. You know, look, a lot of our customers live in the recruiting HR line of business. It's no secret. It is a very functional, if we do this, you know, we will get. And it's true, by the way. You know, we heard on our last webinar with EY and Citi that 17% of EY's employees are boomerangs, 12% of Citi's employees are boomerangs, and they have a $75,000 saving on each person they bring back. And the reason is because it's, again, like dating. At the very beginning, you've got your resume face on. You put your cup in the sink, you wash it, you put it in the dishwasher, and then all of a sudden, at like 3 months and 4 days, the cup just appears on the side of the sink, as my wife would tell me. She's like, I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden it went from being in the dishwasher to above the dishwasher, but nothing really changed. And I think that's the same for employees, you know, and when you are looking at new recruits that you've never worked with, the cups go in the dishwasher. When you go back to an alumni, you know, actually, Sam is incredible. He's not the greatest in the morning. And that's okay, because we know the relationship that we have. You know, I think the second thing around that, and there's someone on this call who told me this, so she should take credit, which is when you leave, it's not spiting us, it's because of us. You're going into your next job because of the skills, the training, the community, the programming, the friends, the culture of this organization. And when she said that to me, I was like, oh, and she's like, yeah, so we take credit. When you get your new job, we applaud ourselves and you, because it should be an amazing milestone moment. But instead, you know, a lot of companies treat it exactly as you said, Lisa, in the alternative way. Carrie, I think I saw you nodding as if you had something to add in that.
I'm just nodding because I agree. I believe that's Lisa who said that. Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. And I don't have anything to add to that at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, as organizations evolve, hopefully sometime soon, from kind of the stigma of that, and obviously, I think you know, it stems from a long history of if my customers leave me, they'll go to you, kind of thing, if you know what I'm trying to say, because we're, you know, both on the same corner selling the same product or service or experience in the case, and you know, I think, just because of the world we live in today, the short-sighted mentality of this, like, we'll treat you well when you're leaving, or we're figuring out how to ensure that the leave experience is better. And I'm like, people's memories are not that, you know, they don't have amnesia. Like, they remember the day they joined. If it was meaningful, they remember how people made them feel. And I think feeling, you know, not to get into the overly warm and fuzzy just yet, but like, I was thinking about something today, which was, you know, when do you know you're successful in experience, like in delivering experience or even designing them? And, you know, there was a quote that I read: I see you, I hear you, I feel you. I have designed something beautiful for you. And it makes you feel good. And the evaluation of something good is how you make somebody feel. I mean, we know that there's a famous woman by the name of Maya who talked about how leaving somebody feeling is the most important thing. But how many people leave an organization and actually feel good about the experience that they had as employees or even as they leave? And there's something about the organization who's almost got ADD, and the minute you say, I'm leaving, it's sort of like, whoop, the tension needs to change, because, you know, how dare we spend any time on people who have left and not on people who are there. And I think that's a perception that we need to address by addressing aspects of both of those, because the state of mind of somebody who is an employee is very different than the state of mind of somebody who is leaving. And it's really important to understand that state of mind in order to engage them in a meaningful way. So,
can I ask a question on that for either of you? So what you're talking about is just the recognition of the value of a long-term relationship. And any individual should understand that personally. So if I personally was in any company, I'm investing the time because I know it serves me really well to be a good advocate, to be a good friend, to be a good whatever I can be to someone, and hope they're going to do the same to me. But in a lot of companies, you know, the performance reports, the QBRs are quarterly. And so you want to launch an alumni network. And so someone wants to put their hand up and say, look, this is a great function for our business. I think it's tremendous, but I'm not going to get bonused for at least 3 years because it's just going to suck the life out of us. It's going to take a moment, so we find it's really difficult for organizations to buy into this down the chain, because they're not generally kind of long-termists, whereas more senior executives sometimes have more of the company in mind and say, oh, 3 to 5 years is in play. I mean, we have a customer who said, look, we are playing the 5-year gig economy game, and that's it. And so anything that happens between now and 5 years is just a win for us. But it's really difficult. So my question is really around how you deal with the fact that it takes work and astroturfing and prayer circles and all of those things to get it working. How do you deal with that gap of time when everyone's looking at you, Carrie, and being like, okay, are we there yet? Are we there yet?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're not. We're not there yet, would be my answer. But there are many beautiful things along the way. And so of any journey. So I often will set expectations up front with my clients that it takes at least 18 months to see any kind of deeply meaningful ROI on your community investment. Now, between today, day one of launch, and day 18 months from now, though, you're still going to have stories, data, insights that you can share and that can help you understand, okay, we're building up to this success. So there are signs that your community is starting to mature, including, people are starting to actually talk to one another without you prompting them. They're starting to self-organize so that you're not, as the alumni community manager, for instance, having to plan everything. People are actually stepping up and connecting with one another. And so these are signs that you're moving toward a sustainable community. So I will often report on, 3 months from now, this is where we should be. We should be where, we're still doing a lot of top-down work. We're still relationship building. We have gained, at this point, at the 3-month mark, it's all about insights. What have we learned in 3 months? So if I can deliver an insights deck and recommendations based on deep relationship building over 3 months, that is a major success. And it often teaches executive teams what they have not been able to hear before. So it's not, I think it's wonderful that people can have a 3 to 5 year horizon for seeing
the journey, not the destination.
Yeah, right. But
okay.
I mean, and there are still plenty of things you can be sharing, both stories and data along the way.
Can I ask you to give a little bit more detail on what you mean by those signals or those insights, essentially? Because you mentioned at the very beginning, sometimes the things, I don't know where I stole this from, sometimes the things that count the most can't be counted or are tough to count. And so when you talk about signals and insights, I guess, what do you even mean to a certain extent?
So there are certain things I look at. There are 3 levels of metrics that I'm looking at in a community, starting with activity and meaningful engagement, which is different than engagement, which I think we'll get into in just a little bit. Health of that community. So is it actually healthy, or is it a terrible place that no one wants to be? And then the outcomes. So those big business outcomes. And those are the ones that 3 to 5 years from now, you'll be reporting on those and they'll seem really amazing. And everyone will wonder, how did you get there? And then other people from the outside will say, well, we want to do what, let's say we want to do what Coca-Cola did because they just built this community overnight. And so we're going to do the same thing. So from the perspective of engagement and health, there are signals that the community is moving toward those outcomes. So that includes things like, what I already mentioned, but also I'm trying to think of an actual example I can share with you from a client, because I think that will be more helpful. I look at conversion rates. That's one of the first things I can be looking at. So what is the conversion rate from invitation to acceptance? Then what is the conversion rate from acceptance to participation? What is the conversion rate from participation to still participating 3 months from now? So if I can work with those metrics, at least within the first, few years, and optimize those and increase them, then I know I'm working toward those outcomes more fully. So those are some of the things to be looking at in the meantime.
I think 100%. And I think a lot of people on this line who I know and I recognize, don't realize actually how easy it is to get access to your data, how easy it is to look at things like Google Analytics and set up those goals and the conversions. It doesn't require a PhD in statistical analytics. There are tools out there that let you do that. And, I think people don't realize that you don't have a choice. You're in the data business, period. And if you don't realize you're in the data business, you're in the gut business. And that might be right 50% of the time. But who really knows? So turning that kind of to you, Lisa, which is everything that Carrie said is amazing and lovely, and it does the community feel warm. But at our company, that's not how it works. At our company, there's risk. And, if you post a comment, we have to approve it, and we don't trust our members. And we have the 17 cycles of controls. And it really feels a little bit like a dictatorship. And we call it a community, but we don't actually let our users self-organize. Are you kidding me? That will never happen. And what I mean by that is some organizations have accepted legal statement of zero risk. As in zero. There is no conversation, and there's really nothing you can do when there's a zero risk statement, But I guess, Lisa, how do you deal with that? A human conversation in an organization that is often inherently not very human, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, my natural response to anybody that says no is, tell me why. Tell me why it's not. And I think what we find is that those are real risks for organizations, but there's always real solutions to it. And for me, not to sway from your conversation,
please.
When risk is the defense mechanism, there's something more behind that, in my opinion, than just risk. It's either a sense of fear that it's not going to be successful, or how dare we trust these people who, by the way, just as a quick reminder to everyone, these are the people you trust to manage your customers, but you won't actually let them manage their own conversations. That's kind of interesting, because if they were going to really mess you up, probably would have done it, or they've done it already. So if we're going to have a conversation around risk, let's be honest about what the risk is. When you take on thousands and thousands of people into your organization, you've already accepted that risk a long time ago. The world of social media means nothing these days. I mean, I can share anything I want whenever I want, and there you go. So, and I know that, and I don't mean to make it not an important conversation, because risk is extremely important. But I believe if there is a will, there is a way. And so I think what we need to begin to start talking about is, let's have the real conversation about why risk is the only thing we're talking about right now, and why we're not thinking about the ways that we can actually manage risk in a responsible way, while also delivering some kind of value to the people who we need for our businesses to stay thriving.
I mean, it's a constant conversation. I mean, we have it with mainly banks and regulated industries, governments, who are like, 1 second, we're going to let a user upload a background image to their profile. And I was like, I never realized that was a thing. Well, yes, what happens if, is it a hot dog, that type of conversation? We're like, well, yes, we have tools that can prevent those type of things. But again, that person was managing your money. That person was managing your customers, if they can't be responsible. And the view would be, well, maybe they're angry. And our view always is amazing. The greatest thing you can do is find someone who perhaps didn't have the best experience and solve one problem for them. Reach out, recognize it, open. Like, anger's not a bad emotion, and venting's not a bad emotion. And I'd rather you vent inside this community than on Glassdoor or Facebook. And I think people have this misunderstanding about what risk is. Risk is not someone being able to be honest and true. And you talk about this, Carrie, in your book, so I'm sure you have some stuff to add, but people are always thinking about that. Well, what happens if someone posts something negative about the company in this closed community where everyone they post it to will probably know that information also? Like, how do you even approach whatever that question is in there somewhere?
Yeah, I mean, what my question back to that is, well, how do you deal with them sharing that outwardly? If you can't deal with it inwardly and in a closed space, how are you going to deal with it externally? Because they are going to be talking about you. I will share, I've worked in-house at several different companies, tech companies, and people are constantly calling me and asking me for, what was it like working there? So I'm going to share that. It would be much better if I could share that honestly, not just in an exit interview where I'm feeling resentful and annoyed, but a year from now, when someone actually reaches out to me and says, I want to help you make progress in your career. I know you don't work here anymore, but your career and your progress are important to me. So I'm going to share that with anyone who calls me and says, what was it like working at blah, blah, blah. I'll say it's not just, it was great working there when I was there, with caveats. There's always caveats.
Of course.
But they actually care about you as a human being, so that if you get in the door there, you'll be taken care of for the rest of your career. You'll have people who have your back. And
it's like an emotional reference, right? It's like when people, it's a hugely emotional reference. You weren't asking, do they support, my training and my guidance and my certifications? What's it like to work there? How's it going to make me feel? Exactly, going back to Lisa's point, how I feel. And I think people forget that entire point. We have one customer that for certain people, a few weeks after you go to your next job, they send you a basket to you, well, not anymore, to your company. And they say, hey, just so you know, we wish you the best of luck now at IBM. We all miss you. So from your team over here at this company, we wish you the best of luck. If there's anything we can do for you, let us know. That tiny token, changes everything. That's the only thing that human's going to talk about for weeks and weeks on end. And it basically costs $45 for a decade's worth of championing. And I think people misunderstand that, right?
Right. But here's the thing, James, is that from the organizational, you're talking about the individual standpoint. So I'm going to get that package and it's going to make my month, right? But from an organizational perspective, what the executives and other managers are asking is, what's the ROI on this? And is it scalable? And why, what are we getting in return? And what I want to just say to all executives and potential clients is, remember that individual experience. When I'm talking to community members, because I often will do research when I'm working with a client, they are always talking about those small experiences. They're talking about when they worked in teams that have made a difference, with the individual people who have changed their lives, with these small, special moments. But then the organization is not thinking about those most of the time. They're looking at their spreadsheets and wondering, how do we optimize this? But that's not the conversation going on the other side. So we've got to bring those two together, because there's a huge mismatch and misalignment there we have to address.
Yeah, there's almost two sets of what success means. Yeah. Success for organizations is ROI. Success for individuals is not ROI. It's how you make me feel. Mm-hmm. And until organizations, that's why I brought the whole idea, organizations need to be thought of as humans, and they need to sort of break away from spreadsheet a little bit, because spreadsheet only tells you a part of the story. I don't even know if I could say that. Yes, it does tell you a part of the story, but it's certainly not the whole story. And we all know what happens when we operate with only half the truth, or a portion of the truth. Is we keep running around to find the truth, and it's actually sitting in front of us. We just haven't opened our eyes wide enough to kind of consider that a human issue isn't going to be well translated in a piece of spreadsheet with data.
So, I mean, it's such a obvious gap, which is, you're right, the corporate mentality of what's in it for us is not the employee who reminds you of that stupid moment when you were working on a project together and Sally fell up the stairs. Those are the moments that people talk about, not the project ROI or the success, or that moment you landed the big customer, you walked out, you high-fived, and you all went to TGI Fridays. Those are the moments that I have in my career that I really remember. I don't think I remember anything in between. It's all the moments I shared with the people in the organization. So with that, let's talk about measurement for a second. The exit interview, the Qualtrics scores, the net promoters, those type of things. How does one even consider measuring the unmeasurable or difficult to measure? And how should one think about that? I mean, look, every customer comes into us and says, can we add a net promoter score at the end of the interview? Because that's what we use internally. And we're like, okay, I mean, if you want, I don't know what you're going to do with that data. I guess there's a lot of things you could do around sentiment. But, to a certain extent, I think I want to ask you guys, talking about measurement and check-ins and surveys, and how are you feelings with community members? Either of you.
Carrie, I'll take a stab at it and then you can correct me. How about that? So I think for me, measurement is important, but I don't want to measure sentiment. I want to use discovery to understand people's needs and where they're feeling the sense of meaningful connection. I want to use measurement on, we did something it made an impact. So it's, I think people are doing a lot of NPS and CSAT and stuff like that, and it's all good, but for what reason? It's almost as if sometimes I hear a lot of clients saying, we're going to measure it. I'm like, oh, that's great. But do you realize to measure it, you have to ask people how they feel about it. And every time you ask them how they feel about it and you quote unquote measure it and you do nothing about it, that's just another level of you letting them down in the relationship. It's kind of like when your husband says, I promise I won't do that again. And then 2 minutes later, the darn cup is on the sink. It's not in the sink or in the dishwasher, as James said. Like, you can only do that so many times where you're kind of like, okay, so now I realize that, you might be doing your best, but there's, you're just not telling me the truth, if you know what I'm trying to say. So for me, I think that's kind of where it lands, James. Like, there's a benefit to measurement, but I think we've become, because somehow data and measurement have, in my mind, for a lot of people, have been confused. Like, data is good, but data is to help you understand. It's not to only measure. Measurement is when you have data, you have an insight, so you learn something, you go and try to make a change, and you measure to see if the change has actually made an impact, not the same conversation over and over again. Because people are, I've been doing lots of surveys with a lot of companies, and while I think it's a really good baseline, they tell me, like, when do we do it next? And I'm like, after you do something about it, and then you can see whether you made a change. But like, asking somebody the same question 2 months ago when you haven't done anything is like hoping that something's changed miraculously and now it's all better.
I've almost always thought that the survey, the only thing a survey tells you is who's willing to take a survey. Like, that's it. And the reason I think that is because if you look at people who are like, when they arrive at the platform, we want to ask them what they need. Everyone always says content and news. But if you look at the data, no one gives a shit about the content. No one reads it. So there's a massive gap between what the user is saying they are interested in and want versus what they're actually doing. And so what we get out of the survey is, okay, these people are willing to be part of a focus group. These people are willing to open an email. These people are part of that. But we actually have to have a conversation with them, because there's a lot of companies who will tell you, we have a 76% positive rating with all of our alumni of the 21% that actually took the survey. And you're like, cool. That's a vanity statistic, which I love. Great if that gets you more budget. But between us, let's talk about the fact that no one took the survey because 80% don't care, essentially. So I think that kind of moves to that next conversation, which is around, you've both talked about doing impactful things, be it for one person, nail it, then scale it, solve one problem for one person, then work out how you're going to make it work globally, whatever that means. But don't start the other way around. Don't start with being like, well, what happens if everyone loves it? That's going to be awful. It's just a terrible way to start the conversation. What happens if it's an overwhelming success? We won't be able to handle it. And for companies, I think that's a tough concept. Look, don't replicate LinkedIn, don't replicate Facebook, don't replicate WhatsApp, work with them. And I think you might have said, at least, and I definitely carry in your book, is what is it unique about this community that you can get nowhere else? Period. Nowhere else. And if it's, if you think it's your directory, it's not. If you think it's your news, it's definitely not. If you think it's your, one event a year about stuff, it probably still isn't, because they can find that. So what is so unique? Like, what are they joining for? Except because they joined because they were curious what it was and they just haven't unsubscribed. And I guess, Carrie, that goes back into your engagement conversations and serving one person. Like, as you start to think about what are those one things we can do, which I love that idea of, and I love your idea, Lisa, of measuring the impact of that one thing. Let me show you the value this brought to Sam. EY, Mike turned around and said the biggest change he made when he was talking to his executive committee is he used to walk in with a PowerPoint of numbers and pie charts and no one cared. And in the last meeting, he said, hey, did you know someone who started at EY as like a tax janitor is now on the board at Coca-Cola? And every single executive in the boardroom was like, oh, and they've never forgotten that. 3 years later, they've never forgotten that. Those really human moments. How do you approach kind of solving one thing for one person in an organization that is monstrously massive?
The thing about storytelling, which is what you're talking about, is stories are so important. Sharing them with the data is critical to actually making change happen. But we can't build so that we can tell a story necessarily. We can't say, okay, here's the story I want to be able to tell. I want the tax janitor to become on the board of Coca-Cola. That's what I want. So I'm going to now, like, it doesn't really, there's all this serendipity and things like that you just can't engineer, even though people really, really try. And I think that part of this is people who are oftentimes in our culture, we're looking for certainty. We're looking for social engineering. How do we make sure that we're, using the latest science to show us that we are, psychologically, making people feel great. But what true leaders do is take leaps and take risks. So you're talking about the zero risk. I don't even know what that means. Is there, I don't know that there's anything that's zero risk.
I got some legal teams to introduce you to immediately, Carrie.
Oh my goodness. No, thank you. I don't see how that's possible. I don't know how you could live in this world and live life and live with zero risk. So yeah, I think there's a leadership gap too happening. And there is a real leadership issue in a lot of organizations. A lot of leaders are not leaders because they're great leaders. They're leaders because they're good at their job in that particular company. And that's not something you as a community manager can fix. It's not. So there's certain times where I will work with clients and they're so frustrated. And my answer to them is, let's start finding you another job. Let's go somewhere else. So
it's a really fair point. That's like an unbelievably fair point, Harry, that if, I think that's the conversation. I think Simon Sinek talks about leadership that says leadership has got nothing to do with hierarchy. Leadership is earned. You can be the lowest person in the company, but if you look after the people around you, you're the leader, period. And there is risk to taking leadership. You got to stick your neck out. You got to do things. People above you might be like, why are you doing that? That's my job. I'm the big man on campus type of thing. And I think that's a really important part for alumni relations as well, is you've got to be willing to stick your neck out and try some things that could be amazing and serve your members, even if you don't quite have all the buy-in that you might need, which leads to kind of a new question, which I'll let either of you jump on. There are people that leave organizations early in their career on unpleasant terms. And I will give the example of restaurant employees, America's first employer. I worked at one, it's not America's first employer, the world's first employer, whether it's McDonald's, Burger King, Sizzler, those type of things. First job, you have no, cadence, you have no programming, you go out the night before, you party a little bit too hard, you don't wake up for your shift the next morning. And instead of phoning your manager like you would now 20 years later and be like, I made a mistake, I'm so sorry, how can I make this up to you? Instead, you go, ostrich and stick your head in the sand and, one of the people we spoke to from big restaurant chains said, we can't have that. If an employee doesn't turn up, no call, no show, and they're too embarrassed to ring the manager because they haven't had training, we have to reach out because otherwise we're losing them, their family's friends, because everyone who's going to be like, hey, do you want to go to this restaurant for Sally's birthday? One guy is going to be like, oh, I can't because I never phoned that manager back and I can't see him. So he was like, it's our responsibility to train people to be good corporate citizens. And it's okay. It's okay. We get it. You're 18 and you're totally oofed it up. Here's how you can make that right. But if no one teaches you that, that's not a course you take when you join IBM. No, they teach you all of these kind of non-human skills, which are amazing. And by the way, I work there and incredible. But no one says, hey, by the way, take $20 from every paycheck and put it in a savings account. No one tells you those things. And I think that's a little area where these alumni communities are starting to build out these functional experiences that you don't get in the company, the kind of, I wish someone told me conversation. So the question really is, I was terminated from one of my early jobs in, food and beverage, but I'd say now I'm pretty good. But I'm in a blacklist or whatever it might be called. How do you think about communities and eligibility? If someone left a company, perhaps not on great terms, perhaps based on experience or youth versus something awful. How do you feel about membership in that conversation? Big question.
Here, you want to take that one or you want me to take it?
Do you have an answer prepared? I could think about it out loud.
But I have an answer. The answer is you accept everyone. And they'll prove to you whether or not they should remain there. Because listen, if somebody is going to take the extra energy to join a community to be, just a naysayer and or somebody who's going to create trouble, then deal with it then. But if you it's like theory Y and theory X. You're either going to assume people are good or you're going to think about them as always a risk. And it's interesting because it sounds to me like organizations are willing to take that risk, i.e. hire somebody. Yes, you do a background check and all that kind of stuff, but I mean, that's not necessarily an indication of future behavior. It's just an indication of what happened in the past. And so if you're willing to take the risk then, and now you're saying that they shouldn't be part of a community, that seems like a really short-sighted, one-sided relationship, which kind of goes back to the whole title of this conversation, right? Which is, even if it's transactional, a relationship isn't a relationship unless there's a give and take on both ends. So I'll end it like with that. Carrie, feel free to add to that point.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add to that when that is the case, when everyone is invited, that moderation is going to be essential. So you're going to need to keep a really close eye on what people are posting, what they're allowed to post, and be quick to respond if something does spiral out of control, because there are angry people leaving jobs, and there are people who have really unpleasant experiences. Generally, I would say they're disengaged. It's not that they're angry, it's that they're disengaged. In fact, I was just reading a statistic that 13% of the world's workforce is engaged in work today. That means 87% are disengaged in their jobs. And a lot of HR managers, there's a fantastic report that just came out from Sharehold called Belonging at Work. And a lot of managers say, that's not my problem. The engagement's not my problem. Well, it is, because then later on, you're not going to be able to get them to join your alumni network. You're not going to be able to, they're not going to share great experiences. But yeah, moderation will be really important. And most people who leave won't necessarily go ham or AWOL in your community, but will just not participate until they find something that's really valuable to them. And I'm thinking about jobs that I've left that have been not such positive experiences. It would be really interesting now to look back 10 plus years and to say, okay, what's this company doing now for their employees? Because I'm sure it's changed.
Right.
And if they could provide a valuable purpose for me that's unique, that again helps me with progress in my career, because communities are about progress. If people aren't making progress being part of it, they will not participate.
How do you measure progress? Sorry, Carrie.
How do you measure progress?
Yeah, I'm sorry to ask. I'm okay if the answer is you don't.
It's not that you don't, it's you can. You don't have to necessarily measure it. You measure engagement. You measure meaningful engagement. If people are making progress, they will continue to meaningfully engage. You're not coercing them to participate in these communities. You're not saying, they don't work for you anymore. There's no other incentive. So you don't have to necessarily measure progress. You could through, surveys or having conversations with people. But again, what's that really going to tell you?
You can almost infer, because they continue to be engaged, you can infer they're making progress and getting value.
Exactly.
Is that a fair statement? Okay.
Yes.
I would also add, if I can, it's progress, absolutely. But it's also when somebody starts to give something more to the community than just take, I feel like that you've got a little bit more than just participation. Because for me, the community is the people. Like, yes, of course, there's a mediator and an organizer who, sort of orchestrates it. But if the community itself isn't in fact adding something to the value of the community, then we as humans we disengage, because we feel like then it's the sense of it's like, all the Instagram messages you get after a while, you're like, wow, this is it gets kind of old. Like it's just coming at me. And then when I start to engage in it and I put my post out there and people like it or dislike it or whatever, per view, that's where give and take happens. That's where progress happens. Because for me, progress is also about learning. It's about setting new expectations. It's about opening my own mind up to new things. And so I think progress is the end result, but what actually constitutes making progress? It's like learning and things of that nature, right?
So much there. Three things. Number one, I want to make sure I'm right on that, is why are we penalizing and punishing the entire community for a few people who might come in and talk shit? Essentially, it seems to be an unfair perspective on how you approach your community and delivering value. The second thing is you can infer progress and value based on engagement. So continued engagement over time. Some of the metrics you mentioned at the beginning, Carrie, for those who come back every 3 months, open an email. And open an email may be okay. If I'm a senior executive, I don't need to log into your portal. I don't need to see that. But I think the third area, we had one customer, we had a turning point where one of the alumni, a senior person who is now at Salesforce, literally posted, hey, I'm at Salesforce. This is the team I'm in. If I've ever worked with you before, literally send me a DM, send me a message, and actually said, don't send it to me on this platform. Send me it on WhatsApp. If I can do something for you, I will. And all of a sudden, the customer was like, oh, what do we even, oh my God, like someone posted something of value that other people are actually enjoying. It's not like just, hey, here's me, here's what I'm doing. But I guess you got to find that turning point, and you got to find that moment that allows people to feel really comfortable to be able to say that. Because a lot of people, we see in the platform, they type a lot of stuff and then they just delete it all and don't post. We see a huge amount of what we would call abandoned posts, where people have ideas, things they want to say. The tweets that I've written that I haven't posted because I've been like, well, 1 second, I guess you got to create a safe space. And I think that maybe is one of the first kind of tenets of a community. I think, Carrie?
Psychological safety, yeah, is critical. People won't participate if they don't feel safe. And there are some times where I would love to see the tweets I've deleted or the ones that I've written and then just never posted. I would say most of them are probably better that I didn't tweet. So yeah, psychological safety is vital for people to actually show up and participate. And how you create that it's a very complicated question, but essentially it starts with consistency, making sure that you are moderating, whatever your codes of conduct are being upheld, and that there's fairness and equality in how you uphold them.
Yeah. One of the things just as you guys are talking that I feel like I've got to vocalize in some way, shape or form, hopefully it comes out in the nature that it's intended, which is organizations have a responsibility. And their responsibility is to create a place, if you will, where people are respected, and that lies in the responsibility of the community as well. Like if we continue to create or let irresponsible organizations exist, then I think we just continue to create a world where people have anger, they have frustration, they don't feel like they're treated well, and Lord knows we can't afford that any longer. My message is organizations get responsible. It's not just about your finances and your customers. It's about what you're doing to the rest of the world as part of the fact that you will likely employ more than one person, or else and if you just employ one person like my company, then I owe myself responsibility. But I think there's a lot of organizations who don't see their role as being one that of responsibility with many people's lives, their mental health, a bunch of other things that I think also, if we want to talk about what's contributing to society these days, organizations are very well doing so, and maybe not all in the way that we hope that they would do so. And I think community is, in my opinion, just a manifestation of that.
Potentially, therefore, an alumni community can be the human side of that organization if they have a leader that's willing to stick their neck out a little bit and to ask, how are you? How can I help you? What can I do for you? Do you want to share something with me? Essentially, there's the value. If someone's like, why should I do an alumni community? Yeah, here's your vanity data. You're going to get recruits. You're going to get all these things. But the real data is, I'm going to actually be human and have empathy and trust you and talk to you as an individual and not as a employee 11739.
Yeah, if you ask most people who left the company and you ask them what was the best part of your experience working for the company, usually, and not always, but usually the number one answer is, I love the people that I worked with. Well, what do you think community is about? It's about being with the people that you used to love to work with. So that's why, for me, it's like a duh. Do I create an alumni community? It's like, duh. Why wouldn't you? Yes, of course, it requires some orchestration and some intentional design of what you're trying to do. But for me, it's just that's usually the number one thing. So why couldn't you just continue that and see what kind of environment you can create for people to continue to love working with the people that they used to love? And most of them, in fact, will. I saw a story this week, and I worked at Accenture for many years, and it's a lot bigger than I did, but I always will feel pride about working for Accenture. And I saw a post of a woman who basically had been there for a very long time, and now her son works there, and you can see the pride just in her post. You can see all the other alumni, liking, and it isn't even that it's not even about the Accenture alumni community. It's about the fact that we all know us together alumni. It's something we shared in our life. And so if we actually start thinking about when you share a lot of time with other human beings, it's not about the company, it's about what that created for the two people and how that can be used to actually foster a more positive environment. So, it's one of those things. If we're gonna keep tallying up what an ROI is, I think we've kind of lost the whole purpose.
I think one of you said when we first spoke in kind of the pre-call, you don't need a business statement, you need a vision statement. And there was kind of like a bit of every time I speak to both of you, I'm like, oh yeah, I need to change my perspective on that. And I love that. Like, nothing makes me happier. A question coming in, we've got a few minutes left. I want to just run to a couple of questions if it's okay with you. So the first one that I have, which I love, is we have no intention. We have no plan. We don't know what we want to do, except we know it's the right thing to do. Can we just start one and kind of build the runway as the plane's taking off? And apologies to the colleague who question I reinterpreted, but I think that's what you were saying. So maybe, Carrie, I'll start with you, because you talk about how you originate communities. Like, is that a thing?
Oh, absolutely. I will say it's not very common among large organizations. The building the plane as you fly it is very common among startups, small businesses, just getting off the ground. I've never seen it done successfully at a really, really large organization. They always want their strategy written out. But then when an employee goes rogue and tries something and it's really successful, then they'll be really excited that it happened. So sometimes it's about asking for forgiveness and not permission on community efforts. But you certainly can do that. There's nothing stopping you.
Yeah, I agree. And it just takes the willing to put your neck out, right? Willing to take the risk. It says, look, we know this is going to work. I'm going to fight. Look, if you are a fighter in your organization, you're willing to hustle and fight and do the work and literally mold the clay into your community, you could literally start there, and you're going to absolutely be fine, because you have the one trait that you need, which is, being willing to jump in and work hard to build that community. And you won't want it to fail, because if you're going to take that leap, you're kind of obligated to work hard to make sure it succeeds.
Yeah.
I would just,
oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, Carrie. No, I was just going to say, I would just add that, like, you don't have to have all the details like that, but you have to have a really, I would say, compelling intention. It's really like people will get behind a movement if the intention aligns with their values or
Can you define attention for me, Lisa? Like, and I don't mean
intention,
like literally.
Intention. Like, like, we're going to create this community because we want to A, B, C, D, E for you, not for us, kind of thing. And I can get behind an intention, but what I might not do is spend my time in something that feels a little zigzaggy, like, because time is money these days, and I potentially could be part of 10,000 communities if I've, been part of 10,000 organizations, which I know is a massive exaggeration. But, have a good intention. That's really what I know all the stuff that Carrie talks about is critical. And when I think about experience, like, everything is designed, or otherwise it's a haphazard thing that's just kind of happened and likely not going to necessarily drive the right intention. But just have a good intention. And I think that's enough to get the kernel, if you will, and to get it popping with a little heat. So
I have a final question that I'll give to both of you before we round out. So I know the person who asked the question very, very well. Our organization is saying not interested in exploring right now. They have 45,000 alumni that are on LinkedIn in a group. They want to self-form. They want to do something more. And the company is saying, not in our strategic goals for 2020. Like, and the question I'm getting from here is how do we even respond with, like, are you kidding me? Or is that the response? Throw a book.
Yeah, let me know how that goes. If you say that, I would love to know, because I've done that before. It doesn't tend to go very well.
Of course.
There's a lot of ego going on there, even with that question in and of itself. With teams that say things like that, you need to tread lightly. And so I work with a lot of organizations who come to me. We were talking earlier about a lot of people are kicking the tires right now in community. They're saying, oh, well, we've heard about this and we know we need to connect people online now because pandemic. So, tell us about it. Convince me why I should care. If I have to spend time convincing you why you should care about this, then I'm not going to work with you. Like, that's my privilege as a consultant, that I can walk away from that, because I've worked for organizations where I've been too frustrated to stick around. So if that's what's happening for you in your organization, you can either fight or flight in this particular case. If you want to stick around and fight for it, it's going to be probably a lot of ego work that you have to do with executives, a lot of storytelling, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of that might just be hot air, people saying, not now, kick the can down the road. I've seen that too many times.
I it's funny, Carrie, because I used to be a skeptical, and as James knows, I can be very skeptical or critical, as my clients do. But one of the things that I think, I'm learning more and more in experience as well, is you have to find somebody who you don't have to prove it to. And there usually is somebody there. Like there always ends up being some, in most cases, and I know that it's, again, out of the ordinary sometimes, but like, you're going to find somebody who has the, just the gut feeling that it's a good thing. Like I don't want to make anyone else feel embarrassed or use executives' names, but there's definitely some companies, and I know they work for EA, where there was a senior leader who didn't ask for an ROI, but just, fundamentally knew it was the right thing to do and started it himself, frankly. And so there are those people, and that's where I believe, like, these are movements. Like, communities don't happen because somebody said on date X, we're going to launch and it's going to implement, and then we're going to have a community. It's more because it's a movement. People have an interest in it. They know that being part of it would be of value to them. They know that whether that value is them giving or them receiving, that at some point in time it'll balance itself out. And so I think we have to start thinking about it more kind of like less as a business imperative and more as just, what people want. They want a social connection to other people in kind of the world that we live in. So I know all that other stuff's important. Find somebody who's aligned with the belief in it, and then then there's power in two, and then you add another person to the network, and you can kind of grow it that way.
Build a tribe.
At least that's been when I worked in organizational change for a long time, and the idea that everything's going to happen on a date plan, that all these things are going to miraculously come to play when you actually haven't spoken to people, is an interesting business approach, frankly, that I've learned doesn't really work. You've got to start with an insight, build some interest, iterate on it, build some more interest, and always be founded in kind of a human need. And if you can, people are motivated to serve their needs, and it's just the way we're programmed as humans. So find the need and find the intention, and pretty much you can build it from there. But yeah, I can go on forever, but I'll stop.
Yeah, I was about to say, you both have been phenomenal. And as we round out the hour, I want to just say not only thank you to you both for your insights, for the reading Carrie I've done of yours. Lisa, can't wait to read yours as well, but more of helping kind of our colleagues and our friends change the perspective, like just how should they do it, including, as you said, Carrie, maybe you're in the wrong place. If you have to stick out and prove it to someone of why it's important, maybe you shouldn't have to. So I think there's a lot of perspectives you've given that are really important to people here. So I wanted to pass on my thanks, also the thanks that I have coming in from a lot of people who just send me these direct messages of like, this is exactly what they wanted to hear, the honest truth about being human, serving someone. And there is a level of risk involved, and we have to be okay that you're taking a risk as an alumni leader. And if you're not, then you might be in the wrong role. So with that, thank you so much to both of you. I wish you a phenomenal rest of day, and I will send out in a follow-up email how everyone can contact you both and follow you both on the Twitters and all of those doodads.
Thanks, James. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you both.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks everyone for joining.
Have a great one.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.